You stand in the blue dusk of an early medieval Highland village, the cold biting at your cheeks like teeth. Peat smoke curls from thatched roofs, mingling with the sour-sweet tang of ale spilled on frozen earth. Somewhere, a fiddle scrapes a crooked tune for the wedding feast, and the laughter of drunk men rolls like distant thunder. But the groom at the doorway does not laugh. His jaw is locked, his hands fists at his sides. Beside him, the bride's veil trembles, though no wind stirs. Behind them, a man in a dark wool mantle marks something in a leather ledger with a bone stylus. He does not look at her, only says, flat and final. The rite must be satisfied. In this place, even the first night of your marriage has been accounted for, taxed, claimed, and taken before it ever truly begins. Before we unravel the grim truth behind this so-called maiden tax, know this: it was not a tale whispered to frighten children, but a law inked into the very fabric of the land. Before we step into the shadows of its history, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where in the world are you watching from. The law was known in Latin as merceta mulieris, literally, the payment for a woman. It surfaced in the early medieval kingdoms of Scotland and Wales, lands where power was stitched into the very soil, and the man who owned the soil owned everything upon it. In the Celtic legal codes, brehon in Ireland, Welsh law in the West, marriage was not merely a personal union, but a contract subject to the rights of the local lord. Among those rights, recorded in chronicles by William of Malmesbury and John of Fordun, was a practice more sinister than mere taxation. The lord could claim the bride's virginity on her wedding night. In some places, this right was commuted into a payment: silver coins, livestock, or goods handed over as ransom for a woman's body. But the law's language left room for abuse. A powerful man could interpret it not as a relic of feudal dues, but as an invitation to take what he wished. To the ruling class, it was a symbol, a public display that even the most intimate bond between man and woman began under their shadow. To the people, it was an ever-present threat, and though some historians argue it was more often a fee than a physical act, the line between the two was thin and easily crossed by those who held the sword and the seal. I remember one winter when the frost lay thick on the heather and the river wore a skin of ice. I was then the steward of Dunlachlan, keeper of the Lord's accounts and enforcer of his rights. It was my duty to collect the merceta from every bride in the parish, a task I performed with the numb hands of a man who has stopped believing in mercy. That year, a girl named Era was to be Wednesday 16 summers old, hair like flax in the sun, eyes the pale green of moss after rain. Her groom, Donald, had just returned from 3 years' levy service, his shoulders squared from the shield, but softened in the gaze he gave her. They had little more than a cow and a small patch of barley to their name. The notice went out 3 days before the wedding. I carried it myself. 5 silver coins to redeem the first night, paid before sundown, or the right will be exercised. I saw Donald's jaw tighten. He did not have the money. He had nothing but a promise to his bride and the stubborn pride of a soldier who had fought for a king who would never know his name. The morning of the wedding, the chapel smelled of pine and peat smoke. Bells rang. The priest muttered blessings over their joined hands. Outside, the feast tables groaned under roasted venison and oat bannocks. Yet the shadow of the castle loomed over every smile. When the sun dipped below the hills, I came with 2 men-at-arms. Donald tried to follow us up the torchlit path, but the guards barred him with crossed spears. Era's face was a mask of stillness, her fingers cold in my grasp. I led her through the gate, past the great hall, where the Lord's banner, black stag on a red field, hung heavy in the candlelight. The chamber was prepared, rushes fresh on the floor, a fire hissing in the hearth. The Lord sat in a carved chair, his eyes gleaming like wet stone. He dismissed me with a wave. I closed the door. Behind it, The law took its course, whether as ritual, as cruelty, or as something between the two, I cannot say. I have never spoken of the sounds I heard that night. By dawn, Era was returned to her husband, her veil torn, her gaze hollow. The coins that should have bought her freedom remained in my ledger, unpaid. Donald did not speak to me when I passed him in the market thereafter. He looked at me as though I had been the hand that struck him. That winter, I collected the merchetta 5 more times. Each time I told myself it was better to demand silver than to enforce the right itself. But not all could pay. And for those who could not, the castle's gates stood open, waiting. Even now, decades later, I can recite every name. I remember the way the village fell silent whenever the black stag banner was carried down the road. Weddings became quiet affairs, stripped of joy, for everyone knew that no vow was safe from the ledger. The merchetta mulieris did not emerge in a vacuum. It grew from the roots of a feudal system where land was the axis of life, and those who held the land claimed dominion over everything it bore, crops, livestock, and people alike. In such a structure, the lord's rights were more than legal prerogatives. They were theatrical performances of dominance, staged to remind all who watched that no bond, however sacred, lay beyond his reach. Historians still debate whether the so-called Maiden Tax was truly enforced as a sexual act or was primarily symbolic, commuted to payment in coin or kind. Some argue it was a feudal marriage tax, its language distorted over centuries into legend. Others point to chronicles and oral traditions that suggest abuses were not only possible but inevitable when power was unchecked. In practice, the difference between law and legend mattered little to the people bound beneath it. The threat alone was enough to compel payment, to break spirits, to twist the meaning of marriage into a transaction under the Lord's seal. Comparable customs appear in other corners of medieval Europe. In France, the droit du seigneur was whispered about, though hard evidence is scarce. In Catalonia and parts of Italy, marriage dues could be exacted in labor or goods. But the Celtic world's version stands out for its stark phrasing language that stripped away the veil of ceremony and left only the naked claim. Whether every lord took the right or merely took the silver, the outcome was the same. A bride's first night was not hers to give, but to ransom. And in a world where most could not pay, that ransom was nothing more than a cruel illusion. The winter after Era's wedding, the ledger claimed another name. Morven, daughter of a fisherman, promised to a young carpenter named Cale. Cale had no silver, but unlike Donald, he had no intention of surrendering. On the night the guards came, he met them at the gate with an axe in his hands. His brothers and cousins were behind him, armed with mallets, fishing spears, anything they could carry. They fought in the torchlight, the snow turning black under their boots. I saw one guard fall with his throat opened, another crumple under a hammer blow. But for every man of the village, the castle had 3. Cale was beaten to his knees. The lord's men dragged Morven inside, while her husband's blood steamed in the frost. By dawn, she was returned, her wedding dress stained, her eyes fixed on nothing. Cale was gone, taken to the dungeons. His kin were fined beyond their means, their nets and boats seized, their homes turned over to strangers loyal to the Lord. The village learned its lesson. The next wedding was small, held at dawn, and the bride's father paid the silver before the vows were spoken. Years later, when the law was finally struck from the books, it did not erase the years of silence, the marriages shadowed by fear. Some still say Cale's ghost walks the shore at night, axe in hand, waiting for the gates to open again. In my own ledger, the pages have faded, the ink turned brown as dried blood. But I remember each entry, each name proof that in those years love was never free, only borrowed, and always at risk of being taken back. In the chronicles of the common folk, the Maiden Tax is remembered less as a clause in dusty law codes and more as a shadow cast over every wedding feast. It was a reminder that power could step uninvited into the most sacred moments, that love itself could be itemized and claimed as property. Some lords took the silver, others took the night, but in both cases, the message was the same. Your body, your vows, your future were never entirely your own. Yet, the merceta mulieris was only one of many such rights claimed by the powerful. In our next journey, we'll step into another dark corner of medieval law, a trial where innocence or guilt was decided not by witness or evidence, but by plunging your bare hands into boiling water. Will you survive? Stay with me, and we'll find out.